ICE just killed a woman in Minneapolis, an unarmed U.S. citizen. She is the 4th person to be killed while dealing with ICE and the 16th to have been shot at in the past year, something that had been much rarer in the past. Why is this happening all of a sudden with such frequency? Join me for this brief explainer on ICE tactics and strategies and the underlying causes. From the perspective of the state, immigration enforcement is incredibly difficult. The difference between someone who is in the United States legally and someone who isn't is simply a piece of paper, or more specifically, data in a register somewhere. Accent, skin color, gestures, English-speaking ability, clothing, etc. are all unreliable markers of immigration status. Some might have higher percentages than others, but none is remotely close to 100%. Even worse, from the perspective of immigration enforcement, legal immigration status is not a yes or no situation, as Americans tend to imagine. Rather, it's a continuum that runs from citizenship to zero legal status, where those in the middle have temporary protections, DACA, asylum claims that haven't been adjudicated, deportation bans to particular countries, etc. If you're wondering why this hasn't been reformed and is instead a patchwork of legality, it's because immigration in rhetoric has been conflated with criminality. But in practice, it has been treated as an administrative task where the same person can have different possibilities of legalization depending on their country of origin, timing of arrival, family in the United States, etc. This in turn has made it so that despite immigration reform being on their agenda for 30 years now, Congress has not been able to make this progress more rational, but rather more complex and time-consuming, adding one level of complexity on top of another. But that's only the underlying problem. Specifically with regard to enforcement, authorities have two difficulties. First, every single population center in the US has tons of people who are everywhere within the legal continuum, the status of whom no enforcement officer can reliably adjudicate simply by looking at them. And second, the safest quote-unquote status is one of the most difficult to ascertain with a paper. The United States does not possess a single document that all US citizens routinely carry with them to prove citizenship. Rather, it's a patchwork of identifications which immigration enforcement can look with more or less suspicion. A California or Puerto Rican driver's license compared to a US passport, for example. As a result, immigration enforcement has a continuum of strategies with different levels of disruption. At one end, they can A. gather large amounts of intel, target operations to places where they know people are likely to violate immigration law, like the US border, and concentrate relentlessly on that. Or B. at the other end, they can expand their scope and concentrate on a papers, please approach that goes everywhere in the country. Past administrations have done a mix of the two, the latter with cooperation from local police usually. Obama, so-called the Porter-in-Chief for example, did most of that with recent crossers at the border, most within days or hours, and also people already in the criminal system, as W. Bush had done prior to him. No one, not even the first Trump administration, had attempted to do what they are doing now, however. A massive display of force that raids cities deep in the interior and looks more like occupying troops than law enforcement. The reason is obvious. This required a lot of money and manpower. But most importantly, it could be counterproductive because a papers, please approach implies huge costs on the local population, especially those that might look like quote-unquote foreign. At best, this approach creates a security tax on those who look suspicious to ICE agents, which result in a few minutes where they have to identify themselves. But often, it can lead to far more serious consequences if agents do not believe the person or they do not happen to carry documentation, which again, citizens are not required to carry. It should be obvious that beyond the manpower and resources costs, this would not make ICE a popular agency. People do not like to be disrupted as they go about their day, even if they agree with the larger goal, because from an individual's perspective, it is obvious that they are not illegally in the country. And to prove that should definitely not take much longer than a few minutes. People think, do they not hear me speak English? Do they not see that I'm American? But to an immigration agent, it's the exact opposite. Any one individual should prove to an agent's satisfaction that they are here legally, not the other way around. Thus, mismatched expectations are built in. If this was the only difficulty, it could be more or less manageable, but it's definitely not the only problem. Even if ICE had some sort of ray that showed them only quote-unquote removable aliens and never bothered citizens or legal immigrants, Any ICE operation is going to impose a huge cost on the communities they target as a direct result of the aforementioned patchwork of legality and lack of immigration reform, because they often remove people that have been here for decades, parents of children who now someone has to take care of, or working stiffs that have earned the trust of their community and contribute in a myriad of ways. Because the vast majority of people do not know about immigration law, Americans believe there's a surely law. Surely the government will target only quote-unquote bad aliens. They're illegal after all. So if a person is being removed, surely it must be because they are bad. Of course, that's not how it works at all. Bad has nothing to do with it. So when communities find out that ICE removed a person they know to be good because they know them personally, they assume that either A, ICE made a mistake that can be corrected, or B, it's the fault of the immigrant. The latter will say things like, well, they had 30 years to legalize, why didn't they? But of course, neither one of these is true. ICE probably did not make a mistake, and the vast majority of the time, legalization did not happen because that person did not have a path to legalization. Thus, the more the government engages in a papers, please approach that rates cities, the more these costs accumulate. Authorities both annoy people who are going about their day, and the public also sees more and more violent removals of individuals. Many of these seem shockingly unnecessary because those removed are often people who do not fit the public's idea of bad, that is, men in working clothes, women with children, or even actual children. As a result, the fundamental legitimacy of enforcement starts to break down and become questioned, which is again why previous administrations did not do this. This in turn makes enforcement harder and harder as people start to interfere and communities stop cooperating, creating a vicious cycle. Once this happens, the government has two options. They can either pull back or expand ICE operations and treat everyone as a suspect. This administration has chosen the latter because the architect of this policy, Stephen Miller, does not care about collateral damages, does not distinguish between legal and illegal immigrants, and does not care to. In fact, he truly believes that if we could get rid of every immigrant person in this country and we stopped all immigration to the United States, the country would be better off. Because of the increasing political and social costs of this kind of immigration enforcement, the only way to generate support, or at least maintain it at some level of approval, is to make this a partisan issue in as clear Manichaean terms as possible. They'll say things like, anyone that interferes is an illegal-loving communist. We are protecting you from the illegals, but the terrorist-loving Democrats are preventing us from doing so. Democrats love their criminals. No American patriot would support the illegals, and so on. In this way, anyone who might protest or refuse to support the operation is anti-American by definition. Suspicion expands quickly. The more immigration agents believe these Manichaean terms, the more they see themselves not as a taxpayer operation that serves the public, but as agents defending the good and anyone who opposes them as a traitor. Naturally, someone who believes that will see anything they do as justifiable, increasing the likelihood of using violence, as that is the only advantage they have when they do raids. This is a recipe for the abuse and killing of citizens and a lot of other people. If on top of it, authorities give agents complete legal immunity, whether in rhetoric or in practice, it is a guarantee that killings like the one in Minnesota will not be the exception. It will continue to happen unless the agents or the operations are reined in. As of right now, none of that looks likely. Instead, this is growing into a federal-state conflict which will only increase the cost for everyone involved. Immigration law and its enforcement is supposed to serve the national interest. If the policy ICE follows results in the killing of U.S. citizens, even if every one of them was justified, it is clear that they are very far from serving the public.